Buenos nachos, amigos, and welcome to a fantastic episode of Record Breakers. I am PD Rave, your man with no plan or viruses. Here with me is my team of less than lucky friends. We have Drew.
Hey.
We've got Brett.
Howdy.
And we've got Patrick.
Sponsored by Luden's Cough Drops.
Yay! Speaking of beans and disease, the provider, of course, we're talking about music. I keep forgetting, what is this show about? We talk about music. Talk about music, review it. The provider of the music this week is none other than Brett. Brett, what do you got for us this week?
Well, we're going back to Brooklyn. We've got a little trio of horn tooting, drum beating guys named Moon Hooch, and their album "This Is Cave Music."
Mm-hmm. And this is in fact cave music. And some fantastic, some interesting musicians, some interesting sounds coming out of these dudes. Patrick, what expectations did you have coming into this album?
So, all I knew going in was something Brett said in passing about he saw them open for They Might Be Giants, and I enjoy They Might Be Giants, and I figure most bands who they would allow to open for them might be good at something, but beyond that, I had no idea.
Mm-hmm. Drew, what were your expectations coming into this album?
I sort of went into this knowing what I was getting. Sorry for my voice, by the way. The thing about Moon Hooch is that I went on a trek to find new jazz music on the interwebs, and eventually I stumbled upon the Moon Hooch. So I had listened to them prior.
So
my expectations were pretty high, if I do say so myself.
Brett, what would you say would be the themes and elements that make up this album? What makes this album tick?
Well, this is mostly two woodwinds. They've got somebody who hangs out in the tenor sax area most of the time. They have somebody hanging out in the baritone or contrabass range with other woodwinds or an iwi. We'll get into that later. But there's They started out as a band of making sort of a weird dance music, and they did it in the New York subway system, and it was very, very analog dance music. And this album sort of gets a little more polished and produced. There's a little bit more digital goodies, a little bit of they have an electronic wind instrument, which is kind of nifty, but they also have a little bit of reverb and some effects, some synthesizing stuff. This is, on top of, but it's still something that they can perform live, which is one thing about this band that I found interesting. I heard all of these songs on this album live before I ever heard it on the album, and they do a pretty good job of recreating everything in a live setting in a venue that is, not normally, as easy to jump around from, saxophone to saxophone, or to, like they do, shove a pylon, like a traffic pylon, into the end of your saxophone. But yeah, they do all of that stuff on the fly, and they have the chops to play for about 2 hours straight, which is a physical feat on top of musical feat. Mute button.
Mute button.
Mute button.
Oh, sorry. It's once again bringing back the forgotten mute button. Drew, what would be the themes and elements that you would you would extrapolate? What would you add to that?
This is one of the funkier, fusion jazz bands sort of out there. Their two horns are very, very tight, and their drummer never loses the groove. And that's, from a three-piece like this, you can't ask for much more. They're inventive, and to me, this is the type of, sort of fusion I like. The thing is that I had heard their previous record, which didn't have much of any vocals, if I remember correctly. And this one actually used vocals pretty well. I believe it was from Mike Wilbur, their tenor player. Everything to me just feels sort of fun, danceable jazz that's just really, really cool. But it's also very, very well composed, and it takes a knowledgeable group of musicians to be able to appeal to both a crowd of people who maybe aren't musicians and just want some cool groovy tunes, but at the same time, your musicians, the people who really dive into this stuff, can sit there and go really go like, wow, these guys have chops, these guys are great, and they really know how to write a song. So,
Oh, that is full show. It really does show in kind of the improv and kind of how it feels along the album. Patrick, what would be the theme elements that caught your attention? Kind of with a little bit less of a prelim, less of a pre-knowledge.
So I found they said it in an interview, and it was also on their SoundCloud when I was just clicking around trying to figure out who these guys were. They called the album "This Is Cave Music," and they said cave music is like house music, but more primitive, jagged, and raw. And as we know, I kind of have an EDM thing sometimes, so I was curious to see how two, classically trained sax players and a jazz drummer would make dance music. And oh my God, they're kind of good at it. The thing that impressed me was the drummer actually understood how to make dance music drums, which is not the same as jazz. It is, fundamentally a much different sort of approach to playing drums, but he did it well, and he made it groovy and fun, and they're ridiculous musicians, and I think that always makes it easier to listen to something if you have people who know what they're doing. But it is sort of, it runs this weird line between like avant-garde jazz fusion and like the grooviest dance music you've heard in a long time, and I think it rode that line really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can imagine kind of jamming out to this in a New York subway. I'm waiting for the two line, waiting for the one line up north, to get to my apartment and listen to this at the Penn Station. There's some cool tunes. Brett, what would be some of the key tracks for you? Some of the key songs to look in on?
Well, I'll pick out a couple. I was a really, really big fan of the song Barry 3. It starts off very plotting and slowly builds up. It has a really, really good payoff. And then it has a pretty nice merge into the next track, Why Not, which, it's very much like a dance club where the songs just sort of blend into the next song. It's more of a sit down and listen kind of ordeal. They do break from one song to the other, but there is a definite flow between a couple songs. Contra dubstep is like a good exercise in songwriting where you give the song long enough time to grow and build on its own, and that really paid off. I mean, none of these songs hurry about getting where they're wanting to go. It's a very plotted writing style that I kind of enjoyed. You can pick out a lot of the songs on here, but I really liked Iwi, the song where they use an electric wind instrument.
Yes.
For an Akai Iwi. It's just ridiculous. You get the sound of almost like a drum machine. It's not quite like just a straight bass line. It's sort of part of the percussion kind of almost, but it sort of does its own little ins and outs. It's sort of a strange instrument to throw in because they use their embouchure to squeeze a lot of weird noises out of these horns, and to go to something as sort of silly to me, because I've only seen them as a novelty in my music store days. I've never seen someone rock an Iwi quite like this, and I think it's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Drew, what would be some of the key tracks for you? Some of your favorite tracks?
Oh, well, let's get into the record breakers thing. Number 6. The sax just sort of blasts you. The album starts out with a really, really strong sax song, in my opinion. It's a fun groove. The horns blasting and sort of pulling their embouchure and pulling their notes in weird places is really, really cool. Like Brett said, Iwi was just a cool song. The composition was great. It was a really cool roller coaster. There was sort of the more relaxing moments, but then it would slowly ramp up into like more staccato horns and harsher drumming and like, but it never felt disjointed. There was always smooth transitions between all those parts, which I really enjoyed. And then contra dubstep. If dubstep was more like this, I think I'd be on that hype train for sure. It's just one of those songs that, to me, I want to see this song played live before I die. I really need to do it because it was just so much fun.
Yeah, it was some cool tracks there for sure. Patrick, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
I will jump on Drew's doing the record breakers thing. The opener, number 6. I like that they're able to as sax players, the two of them, the song starts out where it's not perfectly harmonized. Everything is like almost dissonant and not being quite the note you would expect them to be playing together. And it kind of works its way into all of a sudden, okay, now it sounds really good together. And they did that a lot, and that's just showing that they have an incredible understanding of music that I don't have. Like that they can pull from what sounds like it shouldn't work into something that totally works. Five sax piece, the third track, sounds like an old school house song played by an avant-garde jazz saxophone group in the best way possible. Like it feels like an old school house song. It's nice, it's fun, you can dance to it. It's got kind of a nice light intro. And I really, really liked Barry 3 because I've had a love of the baritone sax since I found out what one was somewhere in middle school. The way I think of the sound is it's got a growl to it it's Geddy Lee's bass lines when he's like really, really ripping, where it growls, but he doesn't have to put any sort of distortion on it. And like in a way that like distorted bass doesn't work. You get like this really mean sound when you really rip on a Barry sax. And that song was clearly, created to do the ripping on a Barry sax thing. But it's one of those albums where you just put it on and you let it go and you see where it goes. And it's so well assembled in terms of the songs sort of fitting together in the way that, like, if you wanted to just be this band and play this album straight through live, it would totally make sense because it feels like a set in a dance club. It has rises and falls, and everything kind of, fairly easily links together. And that's impressive to me.
Yeah. They make for good shower music. As I can attest to when I play one over there in the bathroom. Yeah, it was some cool tracks, especially how it opens up at number 6. It really does that like you guys said, the way that they play with their saxes, like they play around with each other on in that intro, and they kind of it's just a really cool sound. And we can go back around the horn. We got those tracks. We go back around the horn. Drew, what would be your thoughts on the album overall?
Like I said, this is one of those things where it's like when I point to groups that do sort of jazz, just that like fusion sort of jazzy sound, like this is one of those bands that I think does it right. They're just really, really solid. I think even if you don't like jazz, even if that's not your thing, I think they deserve a listen just because of how fun the music is. They never try to be hoity-toity. They never try to do the, oh, we're jazz musicians sort of thing about it. They play what they want to play, and it ends up being really fun. So
yeah. They're not here to for the sole purpose of being taught in a community college jazz and popular music class. Indeed. They're here to make fun tunes, make them kind of weird and funky in their own. Patrick, what would be your conclusion about the album overall?
If you're like me and you got a little bit burnt out on dubstep because it just was everywhere, and while some of it is good, not all of it is good. Here's a fresh take on the genre in a lot of times, and just sort of dance music in general. It is unique, and finding genuinely unique music in 2015 is sadly kind of difficult because everything's been done, and this is taking a whole new look at dance music and taking it maybe a little more seriously. But at the same time, like, clearly these guys are like a bunch of like people who, you know, on the weekends are listening to dubstep, probably in between, you know, classic jazz pieces. Like that weird crisscross of two very, very, very different worlds, where somebody in a jazz club is probably the type of person that says everything Skrillex ever wrote sounds like farting, and most of the kids at a Skrillex show probably wouldn't know Miles Davis if his, you know, horn fell on their head. And this brings those two very diverse worlds together in a really good way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really cool sound. And I will say, I did not mean for the fun of using the term around the horn, but I'm glad it was there. Glad that
You're very punny.
I'm glad it lent itself well. But yeah, Brett, what would be your conclusion about the album overall?
Well, this is really everything that I like about music. Everything that I'm passionate about. The fact that you can break every rule, you can make music that doesn't follow the formula but still can conform to a formula. I mean, it's proof there's still fresh ideas out there done by people that are younger than us. I mean, this is an album that has tons of passion. There's nothing that doesn't sound polished. They knew what they were doing. Every bit of this was very well honed. Being a solid trio, like you can follow each of their threads and how they weave in and out. There are three distinct, well-written lines in every song that you can follow individually, but when they come together, it's like, you know, you can tell that they have a passion about this that it has to absorb them, because the amount of work that they go into putting into each song and the length of the songs and how physically you have to play these songs. And none of us here are, you know, horn players or woodwind guys, but
I played trumpet a really long time ago.
I played trombone and tuba.
But just think doing this night after night, like torturing your mouth, for as long as just this album. Like that is a feat, to play all of this stuff. Like, you know. But I enjoyed it. There's a lot of depth in this, and if there's anything that I like in music, it's depth and a little bit of weird.
Yes. Yes. That is for sure. A lot of fun and a lot of weird and a lot of depth in this album. But yeah, those are our thoughts. Let's look and say concise thoughts. Now we get to the main event of the evening, our haiku reviews. We'll see what everybody thought up for a haiku. I'll let Drew rip off the Band-Aid. Drew, what is your haiku?
Beautiful music can be made with so little. Wonderfully jazz.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, what is your haiku?
Brilliant idea, executed flawlessly, and truly unique.
Mm-hmm. Of course, I'll have my haiku. Funky backwoods jazz, quality chops and improv. That was cave music. Brett, what is your haiku?
A simple drum set, a couple of old woodwinds, not what you expect.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of brings it all together. That kind of sums it up. Go check it out. Go check it out on our Spotify playlist. It will be sitting there waiting for you if you haven't already listened to it. Play along with Record Breakers, the home game. On that very Spotify playlist will be next week's record, provided by none other than Drew. Drew, what do you got for us next week?
Next week we got a little band that came out of the remnants of At the Drive-In. From El Paso, Texas, we got the weird hard rock experimental sounds of the Mars Volta.
Yes. So it's very, very interesting discussion awaits us on that episode. But join us next week for that. But that's it. You can find us all over the internet. Patrick is at Swagger. Brett is at HibbDBibbard, HIBBITY, Drew is at XJuciferX. I'm at PD Rave. The show is at 4 Record Breakers. That's the number 4 Record Breakers. RecordBreakersPodcast.com. RecordBreakersPodcast@gmail.com if you want to email us. Rebellion.net for this and other shows. iTunes, Stitcher, subscribe, share, like, youtube.com/RABellyTV.
Go out there and vote. Huey or Hootie. Look it up.
Huey or Hootie. Hashtag Huey or Hootie. Vote. Let us know. It's an ongoing thing. We really want to know everybody's thoughts on it. We're going to keep that going until we forget, which is probably next week. So, keep on that. But that's it. Until next time. Hasta los huevos.
Toodaloo.